September 25, 1983, also known as Longkesh, Maze Prison was located in Northern Ireland, about 15 kilometers southwest of Belfast, near the village of Lisburn. Maze Prison witnessed the largest prison escape in British peacetime history. 38 prisoners hijacked a prison food delivery truck and forced their way out, carrying out a feat that had never before been seen in any prison. To understand the details of this escape, we first need to understand what Maze Prison was in 1983. It was a prison inside a detention center inside a military base. Built in Northern Ireland, about 10 kilometers from Belfast, it stood on top of a former Royal Air Force base. The prison blocks were constructed in the shape of the letter H, known as the H blocks, and each one functioned as its own fortress. Concrete walls 5.5 meters high, barbed wire along the top, solid steel gates operated electronically, additional 4.5-meter security fences surrounding everything, and beyond all of that, the British Army patrolled the outer perimeter. Government security architects described the prison as escape-proof. Maze Prison was responsible for holding individuals the state could not allow to walk free, and inside H Block 7 were some of the most dangerous members of the Irish Republican Army, men convicted of bombings, assassinations, and weapons possession. But according to their own beliefs, they were not criminals. They were soldiers in a war that the British government refused to recognize. Within IRA doctrine, those soldiers had an obligation to escape that prison at any cost. That detail will become crucial as this story unfolds. But then the question emerges, how do 38 men escape from what was considered the most secure prison in Europe, without tunnels, without a helicopter, and without explosives? The answer is not where anyone expected it to be. It begins with a single word, whispered in the corridor of a cell block at 2:30 inches the afternoon. One word that would trigger the largest prison escape in British history. And the most disturbing part of all, the guards let them pass. And they had no idea they were doing it. The plan had begun months earlier, or perhaps years. Larry Marley was the man behind the operation, a man who had already escaped from another prison before. In 1975, he had also attempted to escape from the maze itself in 1978, disguised as a guard, and almost succeeded. Marley knew the inside of that place like no one else, and above all, what he understood was this: brute force would never work. The only way out was to make the prison work for you. So he began to observe. With clinical patience, the prisoners of H7 started a process that looked harmless on the surface. They were friendly with the guards. They called them by their first names, asked about their families, made jokes. They built a calculated camaraderie and used it to gain privileges. The most trusted prisoners were assigned as cleaners for the block. That meant access to the circle, the nerve center of the H block, where the controls, the keys, and the communications were located. For months, they mapped every routine, every shift change, every blind spot in the cameras, and they discovered something no one had noticed before: a massive vulnerability. The food truck that entered every week to supply the block was never searched when leaving. The reason was simple. Prison security saw no need to inspect an empty truck, and that would become the perfect breach in the entire prison structure. Another crucial detail about the escape is that weapons had been smuggled into the prison: 6 revolvers and knives. To this day, how the prisoners obtained those weapons remains a mystery. The official investigation by the British government admits this openly. The method by which the weapons entered the prison remains unknown. The day was chosen carefully, a Sunday, the day with the fewest guards, the quietest day. The 25th of September 1983. It was 2:30 inches the afternoon when 5 prisoners entered the H7 circle to perform the cleaning duties. Nothing seemed unusual. Guards were talking. One of them was drinking tea. Then Brendan McFarlane, the IRA commander inside the block, said a single word: bumper. That was the code. Within seconds, the prisoners, posing as cleaners, pulled out the revolvers. The guards were overpowered before they could react. No alarm, no gunshots. Silence. In less than 10 minutes, the prisoners controlled the entire block. Guards were tied up. The prisoners put on the uniforms. Visually, they had become the very guards who had controlled them for years. At that moment, there was a man with a camera who intended to document everything. Those photographs were never published. The camera was lost in the chaos that followed. At 4 p.m., almost 2 hours after taking control of the block, the food truck was being loaded. 38 men climbed into the back of the vehicle. The driver sat behind the wheel with a gun pointed at him. The truck moved slowly. It passed the first checkpoint. Guards in the watchtower saw what appeared to be fellow officers in uniform inside the vehicle. No one stopped the truck. But at the main gate, something went wrong. A guard tried to block the exit. Shots were fired. One guard was hit in the leg. Another was stabbed 3 times during the struggle. James Ferris, a man with 38 years of service. He would die of a heart attack hours later. He was the only fatality. With the gate finally opened, the truck drove through. 38 men were now outside the Maze prison. The alarm was triggered at 4:12 p.m. Helicopters, tracking dogs, the army, police, roadblocks across the region, but the men had already scattered. Some stole cars on nearby roads, others ran into fields and forests. Within 24 hours, 19 were recaptured, and 19 were still free. Those who were captured and returned to Maze were forced to run through a line of attack dogs. The animals were ordered to bite them all. The injured prisoners were left without medical treatment for days. Years later, during an extradition hearing in San Francisco, the prison governor admitted that this had happened. He also admitted that no guard involved was ever disciplined. For those who escaped, the route led south to the Republic of Ireland. Some eventually reached the United States using false identities. They lived for years under different names. 3 of them died in IRA operations before they could ever be captured. McFarlane and Jerry Kelly, 2 of the leaders, were arrested in the Netherlands in 1986 and extradited back to Maze. But many others only returned to British custody after the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. And when they were released, it was not as recaptured fugitives. It was as part of a peace process, men who received amnesty. The official government investigation reached a conclusion that caused deep embarrassment. The failure was not technical. It was not engineering. It was human. Guards had been manipulated for months by men who understood something fundamental. Surveillance lowers its guard when trust is built. Cameras had blind spots no one had documented. A truck was never searched because routine had made it invisible. The British minister responsible faced calls to resign. The prison remained open until 2000, when it was finally decommissioned. Today, the site lies partly in ruins, and part of it has become a museum. Some of the men who escaped later became political figures. Jerry Kelly, one of the leaders of the escape, became a member of the Northern Ireland Assembly. Bobby Story, believed by many to be the true intellectual architect of the operation, was never convicted. He died in 2020, surrounded by honors within the Republican community. And Larry Marley, the man who spent years planning the escape, was assassinated by loyalists in 1987. An important detail is that the prisoner who carried the camera had it hidden on his body during the entire escape. He photographed the guards tied up, the stolen uniforms, the men preparing to leave. Those images would have been the visual proof of the largest prison escape in British history. The camera was lost in the chaos at the main gate. The photographs were never developed. They were never published. They are somewhere, or they were destroyed. No one knows. And perhaps that is what makes this story different from any other. It is not the escape itself that remains. It is what was left behind. A guard dead while simply doing his job. Photographs no one will ever see. A prison turned into ruins. And a question that still has no answer. How exactly did the weapons get inside? Who inside the system helped them? 38 men walked out through the gates of the most secure prison in Europe. And the greatest security failure was not in the walls. It was in something that no engineering or security system can ever fix. The human tendency to underestimate what another person is capable of doing to achieve what they desire most. The H-shaped blocks still exist in part. There are plans to transform the complex into a center for peace and reconciliation. On one of the walls that still stands, if you look closely, you can still see the marks left by hands that once tried to climb toward freedom. Now think about this. 38 men without phones, without internet, without any resources that could not be whispered or hidden in the lining of a coat during a family visit, planned and executed an operation that lasted more than a year. It involved dozens of people inside and outside the walls. And it not only overcame an entire security system, it publicly embarrassed one of the most powerful governments in the Western world. They used the only resource a prison cannot contain: time and attention. While the guards made their rounds and wrote in their reports that everything was normal, the prisoners observed their watches, their routines, their faces. And when the moment finally arrived, they knew exactly what to do. They knew more about that prison than any guard or security chief inside it. This story is a reminder that any system, no matter how well designed, no matter how many cameras, walls, and guards it has, is always vulnerable to human failure. In the end, the willpower and coordinated teamwork of those prisoners overcame the prison itself. The system of Maze Prison ultimately made a fatal mistake. It underestimated its own prisoners by treating them as ordinary inmates, when in reality they were anything but ordinary. And that mistake was enough for 38 men to disappear on a Sunday afternoon while the world was looking the other way. After these events, Maze Prison would never again open its doors in the same way. Because after that Sunday in September, there was nothing left inside its walls that the world did not already know. And perhaps that is what makes this story impossible to forget. It was not only the audacity of the operation, not the numbers, not the diplomatic embarrassment. What makes this story unforgettable is what it says about human beings when they give everything they have: teamwork, time, and determination in the pursuit of freedom. 38 men saw that path on a Sunday in September, when the whole world was looking somewhere else.